And yeah.
Hello and good evening also from the Goethe Institute Ljubljana, and welcome to the second event of our joint endeavor Gaming Gets Serious, which is organized under the umbrella of the Franco-German Cultural Fund. Today we are welcoming two guests from Germany, Florian Köhne and Hans Böhme, who will be talking about themselves, about their work, and if I may say, game design. Before I continue, let me just thank to the whole team and everyone who made this project possible, especially Charles Non from the French Institute, Rok Kos from Slovenia Games, Bojan Clemens from the Faculty of Computer and Information Sciences, and the whole team of Outfit 7. And again, returning to you guys, a big thank you that you are today with us. As I said, Florian Köhne and Hans Böhme, who are joining us from Berlin. They are working at a, again, Berlin-based company called BTF, Bildundtonfabrik, if I'm correct, meaning factory, meaning in a let's say a stupid translation, a factory for images and sound, or something like that, and are very well known for their awarded game Trüberbrook. Is that correct? Okay. Yes. Which you will also hear about today, but they also worked for different agencies, TV stations, I don't know with whom you have not been working, but the crown jewel is the German FBI. So I hope that we will be hearing also something about that. Everybody listening, thank you for following. Enjoy. Do not hesitate to ask questions, whether in the chat box or afterwards. If you want to know something more about our guests, visit their page, our Facebook page, the page of Slovenia Games, the page of the Institut Français, and that should be it for my introduction. Thank you.
Thank you, Urban. Thank you, Rock. Thank you all for having us. We are quite happy to be here, although we would be even more happier if we could make it in person to Ljubljana, which didn't work out yet, but now we'll just do it in the online way. Yes. So thank you for the introduction. Yes, I am Florian. This is Hans. We work for a company called BTF, which, yes, right, means Bildundtonfabrik, which roughly translates to picture and sound factory, which is not a very creative name for a company, probably. That's us. I work mainly as like a writer and a bit of a producer for the company. I'm the head of our tiny game department. Hans is the art director here. And we just wanted to give you a quick introduction to the company, because it probably isn't a traditional video games company in that sense. It's rather like a media production company with say, curiosity for different forms of expression or genre or media expression. We do a lot of different stuff. The company started out like now 10 years ago as a bunch of art students. And I believe this spirit of like that we have from art school still is a driving force, like in everything we do, and it's also part of the mentality with that we approach stuff, I think, our projects. So in the beginning, we were doing a lot of TV stuff, music videos, documentaries, even exhibition design. And I think there's literally not so much form of media that we didn't try to mess around with, but so I think there's one unique feature about the structure of a company, because we have like artists, graphic designers, composers, sound designers, animators, like programmers, everything you can imagine we have under one roof, which I think is like a unique feature, because usually I think you try to buy in some of these services from freelancers or from specialized companies. But as we have so many projects at the same time running, we managed to like have something to do for everyone every day. So yeah, I think that's a unique feature, kind of. Right now we are 70 people in the company, but only 5 of us are really doing games. But that is something we'll come to in a minute. So like having such a bunch of people allows like having full creative control over the projects you do. Like we like to from the first pitch of a project until the end, we like to be there and have control over it until it is released. We even have our own studio in the meantime. We have built it all by ourselves in an old carpet shop, which now serves as like a workshop for woodworking, also as a TV studio and stuff like that. This one is in Cologne, but our unit actually is in Berlin. So yeah. As I mentioned, we are a lot of people with a lot of different interests. So of course there were some people who would like to do games, and we just at some point decided to give it a try and started making our first game. And this is how the game department of BTF came to be, which is in Berlin actually.
Yes. And those are all the projects we did since basically BTF is doing games. And we started out doing games as a fan service for the late night show we've been doing at that time. Those are the first 2 titles you can see on the left. And while we did this, Florian had like this side project, which he did like in his free time mostly, where he worked on the rough concept of Trüberbrook. And after we got a funding in Berlin, actually, the company could afford to set some workforce and money aside to work full time on Trüberbrook and to do some first tests with it, some visual tests, some gameplay tests. That's why some of the stuff of Trüberbrook is still developed in Cologne. But back then, the funding situation was a little bit different compared to what it is today in Germany. And the funding for media in Berlin was, I think you can say, by far the best at that time. Mm-hmm. And we got a project funding of 80,000 euros. And this allowed us to actually have our own team and also move to Berlin. This is the team structure we have today. Our team changed a little bit during the times, but this is what like the team size we're working with right now. And it has always been kind of like this structure. We were, I think, almost always 5 to 6 people in the core team developing it. Yes, and money wasn't the only reason why we actually moved to Berlin. There are several other reasons which are connected to how the game scene is structured in Germany, how it is. And I think Flo will tell you a little bit about it.
Yeah, right. It's I'm in Germany. We have the situation that like most of the games are created in like the bigger cities, like Cologne or Munich, Hamburg, and of course Berlin. And as soon as we arrived here, we got the impression that the scene in Germany overall isn't that big. So it didn't take that long, like that you had the feeling to know each other. And our funding partner, which Hans talked about, took a lot of effort to like introduce us to everyone. But still, in the end, you have you get the impression that there are like 2 or 3 big companies in the whole country, and like a lot of smaller indie teams that all have the same struggles basically and the same burdens that they also like to share, like on events or something like that. So I think that was like a very nice start. They made it very easy for us to feel welcome here, and still my impression is that the German game scene is rather small, I think. We moved into a special place here in Berlin, which is called Saftladen, which translates roughly to the juicy store or the juice store.
Yes, and it's a play on words. Actually, it can mean literally a store for producing juice, but it can also mean a bad company in German slang. The name derives from the location this co-working space was first set in, which was literally an old factory for juice. And we moved to this. It wasn't our first destination in Berlin, but is where we are right now at. And the cool thing about a shared space like this, as you can see on the photo, there are a lot of people and a lot of people that are working also on games. So there is a lot of exchange. We can pick each other's brains. We have also shared events. The game scene here in Berlin used to be quite active. Of course, right now, like pretty much everywhere in the world, it is a bit more calm. I hope it like will have a revival in the future. Still, there are many digital events, and just meeting people here that have the same agendas, having the same problems they're working on their projects. Just you can show around your game, and it helps a lot, and it gives you always a fresh spirit. As we introduced earlier, by moving to Berlin, this was actually our starting sign for moving on our first big game. And as I said, the 2 first games, they were not that big in scope, and they were kind of fan service and orientated heavily on old point-and-click adventures. But the next one we then did in Berlin was this one.
Yes, it's called Trüberbrook, which is kind of a German word. It's a nonsense word. It's like the name of the town where the setting, where the game takes place. It just sounded very German to us, so this was in the end the title of the game, and it somehow worked out. So people get curious when they see the German umlaut, which is the U with the 2 points on it. It somehow suggests that this is set in Germany. And before we come to the core of this talk, where we want to talk about more like about narration or game design, we just wanted to tell you a bit how this came to be, because when we set sail from Cologne to Berlin, it was at first just Hans and me. Before the team grew, we had no idea whatsoever how to do a video game on that scale. We had no idea how development works in general, what pipelines and workflows you should use, and not even how much it would cost in the end. So we just like take a dive into it. and decided to give it a try because everyone has to start at some point, and we had this like initial funding from the Median Board, which is the regional fund here in Berlin, about 80,000 euros, which Hans already said. And we had like a concept for this idea, like for an adventure game with a strong visual language, because we knew a bit about that. We were coming like from art school, from design, so we knew a bit about like visual stuff. And also because we were working on films and movies before, we knew that a genre that is quite linear in storytelling would be a good entry for us in like making games before, because the mechanics are easy to grab. It was easier for us to get into the gaming, into games with a genre like adventure games. So the original recipe is basically a classic point-and-click adventure game. In a way, you may know this genre. It was popular in the 90s. In Germany, it is still kept alive somehow. We don't know actually why, but it still exists and it's a big thing here. And we took this recipe and tried to like streamline it a bit and make it a bit less frustrating for casual gamers, a bit more accessible. And that game in the end eventually would become Trüberbrook. We can show just a short trailer of it.
Mr. Tenhauser, there is no need to play games anymore. Assuming you knew, where have you been born or assembled?
Well, it all began a few weeks ago when I got this notification that said I won a trip to Europe. I was stunned, but Aunt Lottie gave her blessings. A prize like this should not be forfeited, she said. So after a brief visit to Berlin, I began my journey. Beverly, I have arrived. I feel spewed out into the most barren, dark void of Europe. All things considered, this could most likely be the best vacation ever.
There's something in the air. Can you smell it?
I must say, Beverly, I absolutely fell in love with this town already. Truda, this establishment you call your own has quite the charm.
A family business for more than 75 years.
Intruder alert. Please identify yourself.
Name's Tannhauser. I'm a physicist. Right now, I'm writing a paper on quantum physics. Could it be possible? Did that guy just disappear with my paper?
I knew you had the spirit of adventure in you. It looks like they really wanted to make sure there was no trespassing.
These must be the thrills they advertised.
Some people are scoundrels, others are not. Yes, that's how it is.
And that's how I ended up here.
Not 100% convinced yet. Maybe you had us fooled all along. Let's keep you here for the time being.
Just as a side note, as you could hear, probably the voices, the characters are voiced by German actors mostly, not everyone. The main character is English speaker. But we did this on purpose because we think it transported the idea of the game better, and they are also like quite famous people here in Germany, which of course helped like sell the game in Germany.
Yes, and the trailer already told you pretty much what the game is about. Let us still summarize it a little bit for you and what our thoughts were behind crafting this scenario and this narrative. The narration takes place in a very unique German countryside setting, and this comes because we noticed that even though games are produced pretty much internationally, worldwide, the settings tend they do have a tendency to be relying on the same tropes over and over again. This might be on the one hand either like a generic Western fantasy setting or a generic Western science fiction setting, or on the other hand, and this is what we noticed, it's very often the United States and stuff we know from Hollywood productions. And there are a few examples. For example, Life is Strange, which was developed by, I think, French developers, right? Which is set in the United States. And the same goes for the studio Quantic Dream that did, for example, Alan Wake. They're set in Scandinavia, and still all their games are set in the United States again. And that was Remedy I was talking about. Quantic Dream is also in France, and also almost all of their games, I think, like Heavy Rain and Detroit, are set in the United States. And it's just something, as I already said, which we kind of learned from cinema, because it's so dominated by Hollywood productions that, of course, show stuff that takes place in what is familiar to them, and that's their own country. We know a lot of things, for example, like Twin Peaks, a lot of movies and series that have a setting you could easily, at first glance, already identify. There are already also a lot of series and movies that are set in the southern states of the United States. 3 Billboards Outside Ebbing, Missouri, for example, is a good example. You always meet kind of the same scenarios, the same characters. And we noticed there is so much from our own experience here in Germany and in Europe that is not portrayed by this, and that you can take so much out of your own culture and make something new and refreshing. I think for computer games, the Witcher series is a pretty good example for that, because they incorporated Polish folklore into the game, and that's why this game feels so special and distinguished compared to other fantasy games. And another thing is that if Germany is portrayed in computer games, it's mainly just a backdrop for another story. For example, for World War I or II stories, where you see always Berlin in ruins, which is also interesting as a setting, but it has been used a lot. So we chose to show the rural German setting, which is very familiar for people living in Germany, but we're all kind of coming from the countryside in our team. So even though we're in Berlin right now, we all pretty much know stuff like that, like stuff that is pretty similar to what you see in Trüberbrook. And that's why we're able to create this world relying on our own experiences.
Yeah, just a quick side note for that. That was the wrong. There's this really weird film genre in Germany, which is called Heimatfilm. I believe it is somewhat unique to German culture, or I don't know exactly if it is that unique, but it was a thing here. There's no literal translation for that in English, because Heimat, it literally means home, but there is so much more like connected to it in a cultural way, or like with your heritage and your roots. So this is quite a kind of a goofy genre, which was very popular in the 50s and 60s in Germany. And there were a lot of studies like about why that was so popular at that time. And people suspect that it was this kind of romantic, untouched world that was portrayed in the Heimatfilm that helped them escape from the real world, where like Germany was also in ruins, like many parts of the world, and they just took these goofy films to escape reality. It's like it's always outdoors. It's in little towns and forests and in the mountains. Very stereotype characters, like the bad guy, the good guy. Someone usually falls in love with a girl and in the end, the good guy marries the girl. Today, it is regarded largely as like kitsch and a form of suppression of the real world at that time. But at the core, that is something like we took a lot of ideas from, because it is not so often. I think it's probably never portrayed in video games, so the setting where we are, like this town of Trüberbrook, is like a health resort that is set in a landscape like this. So this brings us to like the next point, finding the bizarre in the familiar.
Yes. As we said, we can connect to what we're showing in the in Trüberbrook from our own experiences and our own lives. And we thought, since there are some forms of media and some forms of narratives that are popular for their own settings, like, for example, in Scandinavian TV and also internationally, the Scandinavian crime thriller is a thing you will always recognize. Maybe we can translate all this into our own world of experience and in what is familiar to us, and also craft something from that. And what you always find in like, for example, in Scandinavian movies or series, what you also find in series like Twin Peaks, the examples I mentioned before from the United States, is that you take a setting that is familiar to the people producing the form of media, and you present it to the outside world. And for the people who also live in that land, for example, for people living in Scandinavia, for them it's pretty recognizable. They know what they're seeing, and they experience in one point of their lives. They saw, for example, a forest like depicted in a movie in their own hometown or something. But for people living outside, it has this interesting, almost exotic charm to it. And it gets also pretty recognizable. And we wanted to do the same with our stuff. And we wanted to see if it's possible to tell universal stories and have universal themes like love, friendship, with which everyone can relate, but give it our own wrapping from the stuff we know and the stuff we can actually tell about from our own experience.
Yeah, so to quickly boil that down again, like we took this Heimatfilm setting, threw in a lot of our own experiences, and took this like basically very boring German rural reality, and tried to find something interesting in that. We also set the game in the 1960s, which makes it even more extreme, because there's so much going on in the world. There's like the Cold War, the space race, like students protesting everywhere. And in our little town of Trüberbrook, like nothing is going on. It's a very sleepy town, so the contrast is even more extreme. Also in the 60s, you had no mobile phones and no internet, so the feeling of loneliness is even stronger in that case. So we took this scenario, and on top of that, we put another layer, which is a sci-fi story that could be from like the X-Files or an episode of Twin Peaks, which make this sleepy town, it makes it kind of obscure, with a mystery slumbering beneath the town, and invites the player to just unravel this mystery of this already strange and sleepy town, and explore something that is even more strange. And we decided to let the player see this through a character that has never been in Trüberbrook before.
Yes, and as Flo said, our main character is this fish out of the water. He's an American physicist who happened to, quote unquote, win a trip to Trüberbrook, and thus the mystery starts. He also really doesn't know what he's doing there, but he uses the chance of this retrieve to finish his thesis because he's working on his PhD. But in the first night staying in this secluded little town, his notes get stolen, and thus he finds out more about the mystery that slumbers beneath the city. And yeah, looking through this eyes of this character allowed us to explain everything as fresh and new. So this is what we called a fish out of the water effect. And we can also let players experience strangeness, the strangeness of this world, of this specific setting, through the eyes of the main character. So they were pretty much in the same position as he was when they arrived there. And all of this was pretty much the base stone. This was pretty much all the idea we had. But after receiving the first funding, we knew that we needed a financing for it. And we now want to sum up a little bit for you how we actually managed to finance the game, because the funding wasn't all of that.
It was also quite it's a nice story, I think, because after we received these 80,000 euros as a funding, we were quite sure that it would we could make a good concept with that and seek new investments for that. But as a total newcomer at that time, it is not that easy to get some money, because no one basically wants to lend money to you or give it to you to produce something, because you have nothing to prove that you are able to do that. So I think at that time, this regional funding was the only way to get the thing started in the first place. So we started looking for other ways of funding, and then we decided to do a Kickstarter. I think we could do a whole different lecture just about our experiences with Kickstarter, because that was very intense. But just to give you the key facts, we worked half a year just to prepare this campaign. We had a lot of close communication with the Kickstarter guys to find the right timing to put the campaign online. And in the end, I think we would have needed a whole person for that, just to manage all the stuff that came with Kickstarter and the communication with the very loyal and supportive community of backers. But because it gives a good impression about the game and what we had to show at that time, we can show another video of that. So there it is.
Beverly, you wouldn't believe what a charming little place they've sent me to. Feeling chilled out already. Hang on. What is this?
This is Trüberbrook, a thrilling mystery adventure game set in 1960s Cold War Germany. It's the story of Tannhauser, an American physics student in his late 20s who wins a trip to the remote village of Trüberbrook. Things get strange when some documents disappear from his room.
This is puzzling. Who on earth would steal a paper on quantum physics?
It soon becomes very clear that he didn't win this trip by accident. He is here to save the world.
What do you think?
I think we need to get the hell out of here.
Hi, we are BTF and this is our Kickstarter. Things you can expect: crazy scientists, trans-dimensional traveling,
Stasi people,
dinosaurs,
evil mega corporations. Yeah, I think you can kind of imagine it as Twin Peaks and the X-Files meeting in 1960s Germany, right?
Right, and with a touch of Monkey Island.
You're doing Kickstarter, right?
Exactly. And if placing a video game in post-war Germany ain't special enough for you, here's more. All of our sceneries are built by hand by our devoted set designers. We use real lighting to simulate different hours of the day as well as weather conditions. Also, we can change seasons by redecorating the model. The sceneries are later digitized in a process called Photogrammetry and blended with characters and visual effects. This way, we are able to transfer the real models into the virtual world of our game. The game features full voiceover by our talented voice actors in both English und Deutsch.
Flo, ganz kurz. Ich mach die Hauptrolle. Ich bin der Star, ne?
Nein.
Gameplay-wise, Trüberbrook is a somewhat classic adventure game with a modern approach. The game has a strong focus on characters and the narrative. The story unfolds as you interact with the environment, talk to other characters, and solve puzzles. The puzzles are designed to integrate into the narrative. The interface is kept plain and elegant with different approaches for mouse-based and controller-based navigation. We are developing the game in Unity 3D and are releasing it for every major platform. Right now, we already finished a huge part of the game. Last year, we got through the story and the game design, and in the last few months, we started creating the first scenes and characters. But there's a whole lot that still has to be built, and a lot of characters are needed to fill this beautiful town. You can actively help us finish the game while collecting one of the many cool rewards we prepared for you, and become part of the game. Thanks for backing us.
Hi, this is Ron Gilbert. Please back this project.
Yes, that was basically our last chance to collect any money, and it worked. So we got another 200,000 euros through the Kickstarter, which of course was a big relief and helped a lot to get the thing finally running. And one thing we want to talk about is something that was teased like in this Kickstarter video, the visual style that we talked about before. It comes all down to like miniature modeling, which is digitized via photogrammetry. And we used this technique as a means to like support the narrative that we have thought about earlier.
Yes. So basically, we now that we had the money, and at that time we aimed for 80,000 in the Kickstarter campaign. We got more. At that time, we thought we had a lot. Actually, it was just the right amount of money to actually finish it somehow. And as Flo already said, we had in mind this miniature model style doesn't come by accident. It was our way to expressing the feelings we have and the emotions we connect to this Heimat film, because it has this kind of kitsch and also retro vibe to it, and something which reminded us of the past. And visually, we thought it would be very striking to use miniatures because they remember us of fairy tale worlds, of something from our childhood, like of toys and miniatures we saw, for example, in museums. And since BTF and us, we already had some experiences in movies using miniature models, we thought it might be a cool and special feature for our game also. So it was, on the one hand, it was a stylistic choice, and on the other hand, it was already a given thing because we worked with it before. And I want to sum up a little bit how our process was, because it was different to what other people did. We're by far not the first game that tries to incorporate a miniature model look as a gameplay, as a game graphics look, and we're certainly also not the last one. But what I think we did was we took another approach that hasn't been taken before, and it's kind of an approach that's a mix of many things. And in the Kickstarter trailer, they already summed it up a little bit, but it was mostly for marketing reasons, so it was shortened down quite a bit. what we did actually, and as I said, it's an approach of many different things other people already tried in the past, but we kind of combined them. And there are also ideas we also took with us from post-production workflows from movies and what we did before. So to get all this like atmosphere from the real lighting, the kind of detail you get, the amount of detail you get from that, would be very, very hard to achieve by just generating it purely inside of the computer. So we decided not only the geometry of the buildings and everything should be miniatures, but also the light should be real, which took us to a place where we first developed lighting scenarios for every scene, and we could also switch on and off lights. And just in a stop motion movie, by just flipping between those two images, for example, the two left ones you see with light on, light off, we can simulate a light switch, or we can also have different times of the day in the same model. It sometimes took, for most of the set, it took hours to actually really light them, and was also a process that was very similar to what we knew from film sets. And now we had those images. We internally always called them the beauty shots. And what we then next was already mentioned in the trailer is photogrammetry, and that is a scanning technique that is based on photographs as well. So we lit the whole model pretty evenly. This is the tree house you also saw on the slide before, in this little interior on the left. And you have to light it pretty evenly, because there needs to be as much information for the program that's actually making the 3D model from the scan from the photos. So we still had this, we had a very evenly lit model on the one hand, and we had those beauty shots on the other hand. And to transfer the feeling from the beauty shots to the models, we did a calculation where we found out where the camera point needs to be from the photos point of view in a digital space. You can see the 3D interface we used here, and we had some corresponding 3D points, which are seen on the lower left, and some corresponding 2D points, which you can see on the lower right. And this enabled us to calculate this camera, and then we could just reproject the photographs we took onto the model. And what we get is kind of a model that is, or a photograph that is displaced in 3D space, which is also a workflow you know from matte painting. For example, if you see a castle in Game of Thrones in the background, chances are this is a photo, or if you see a mountain or something, chances are it's a photo that's just slightly offset on 3D geometry. And we had some more things we had to work with there. For example, as you saw on the slide before, there are some artifacts behind objects. We had to retouch them out, also using workflows we knew from other media. And then we just had to recreate the lighting inside of Unity. So what you see here is the finished model, backdrops for the background. But since the characters needed to move inside of the interior and step into the shadow, step into the light, step close to objects, and getting more shadow from that, we needed them to be 100% rendered inside of the engine, so they could actually react to changes. Otherwise, we needed a million photos for them to blend between this. And here you can see such a lighting setup. We used light probes to simulate indirect lighting that's bouncing around the scene. We have a light on the very top that's pretty close to what our main light was on the scene. And what you get by that, by also multiplying out what shadows are already in the photograph and what shadows the character has to cast into the scene. You can see it here where the mouse pointer is. You get a pretty convincing image. Even though the character maybe doesn't look like 100% miniature model, it still doesn't fall out when it comes to the visual look. It is integrated pretty well into the scene. And also the armor you can see in the middle of the screen is also rendered in real time. And this allowed us to, for example, have the reflections on the armor surface change in real time and let it look way more realistic, as if it's just baked onto this geometry. And by adding like a few more tweaks here and there, and having some effects, like for example, here you can see clouds on the top that are moving sideways, we achieved the final image. And sometimes it worked better, sometimes it worked a little worse, but still I think we achieved to always have the characters fit into the scene and have them believable in the scene. And sorry, the mouse is inverted. This is a little bit confusing. Yeah, that takes us to our key learnings. And this is just a part where we want to sum up what we just told you, what we actually learned for our next projects. So in our Kickstarter campaign, we noticed how important it is to have a community already before the Kickstarter campaign and also before the release. So you should try to do some PR for yourself via social media before you actually release, so you can have this big impact on the market. Otherwise, you might be drowning under the just huge amount of games that are coming out every day. And we profited a lot during the Kickstarter campaign because we collected some social media follows before, and it also gave us this impact when we released. And as we already said, just a quick sum up, use what's familiar to you and present it to the world in a new way so the world can have a new perspective on some part of the world. Get inspired by other media. I just said it when I was talking about our workflows. We got inspired by a lot of filmic workflows and just transformed them over to games. We thought interdisciplinary, and also we got inspired by other media when it comes to the setting, what Flo talked about earlier, when it comes to the narrative, and just try to have a broadened field, not only games. If you're doing games, have a broadened field for other media. What is happening there? Can you maybe translate this? Can you take something for your own project and thus make it more interesting? Yes, this was our first big project. We received two prizes in the awards in the German Computer Game Award, which we were very happy about. Our concept artist drew us a little sketch for this and to celebrate this, which you can see on the right. And yeah, there we were, a newly found team. First project is over, and then we actually started into new adventures.
Yeah, and then something completely different happened, because the phone started ringing, and there was someone at the end of the line with a number. We how do you say that?
Couldn't identify.
The number was obscured, and they said, "Hello, this is like the Verfassungsschutz," which is basically the German. Yeah, not the FBI, it's more like the NSA or something like that. And of course, we didn't know what to say at first, but they told us they played Trüberbrook, or they at least knew it. And they wanted to ask us if we could do a cooperation, like do a game together, which they commissioned. So they basically wanted to do a game that helps learning young people about extremism or extremism prevention, more like that. And they gave us like a budget and a topic that the game should be about, but they left us full creative control about it. So we could come up with our own idea. It was very clear that it should be kind of a serious game. So we started like coming up with a concept for that. So sorry, I'm just lost here. The game is called Leon's Identität, which basically means Leon's identity, and it is very short. It's like 45 minutes, I think, which it's good to like make a short play session, maybe at school even in as a teacher or something, or for the students. So it's about like a person that went missing, a teenager who is missing without a trace, and you step in the footsteps of the little brother of this person who enters the room of this missing person and tries to investigate what might have happened. We have a little trailer for that, but unfortunately it's just in German, but I think it gives an impression of what this game is about. So let's just have a quick look.
Mit ihm haben wir jetzt alles durchgesprochen, alle Dialoge. Mehr Leute waren hier auch nicht da. Vielleicht müssen wir uns mal bemühen.
Excuse me, that is another
Was
video.
steht da anders?
There was a Let's Play of Trüberbrook, which followed up in the pipeline.
Ich weiß, dass das alles echt blöd gelaufen ist, aber vielleicht ist es das Beste, wenn wir uns erstmal nicht mehr sehen. Lass uns einfach erstmal klarkommen.
Leon, es tut mir leid. Echt.
Eigentlich will ich ja hier echt nicht rumschnüffeln. Aber vielleicht hat Leon irgendwo Spuren hinterlassen. Leon war ganz schön ätzend die letzten Tage. Er war wohl ganz schön verletzt. Die Sache mit Elias hat Leon echt zu schaffen gemacht. Aber deswegen haut er doch nicht gleich ab.
So as you can see, it's a very calm environment. It's like of a special atmosphere that we wanted to create here while entering this this room of the missing brother. And we took a lot of effort, like to stage this level, to do the world building and the environmental storytelling. There's not so much interaction. It's just like you learn about the identity of this person while you browse through their stuff, which basically is a message of its own. I think it's probably not okay to do that, but in this case, it was an emergency, so the person was missing, police couldn't find him, and you do this adventure on your own to find him. This is basically what the room looks like from the top. These are the logos of the ministry that in the end commissioned the product. We did a lot of flow charts, like to make the narrative as compelling as possible, right? Mm-hmm. With a lot of different people that you can meet there, and that is something we want to talk about a bit later. We tried all the mechanics basically with gray boxing the whole environment. So we didn't do the assets and all the 3D work at first, but we tried to make the game working without the assets, which is an approach to get a feeling if the game works before you put too much effort in it.
Yes. Our take on the topic of serious games was to first and foremost tell a story and have the information being transported during exploring this dramatic story. That's why we put so much effort into having many characters, having actually a flow chart with a lot of story that is conveyed. And our means to convey the story was, as Flo already teased, environmental storytelling. So you find out about the missing brother just by the stuff you find about him in his room. So for example, you can find in a drawer, you can find stuff for technical tinkering. So what does it say about him? What books does he read? He has a little trophy on his shelf. All his old band posters are kind of rolled up in the corner of his room. What happened there actually? And you, step by step, you actually find out. And we tried to spread this environmental storytelling over 3 layers, because we have this very limited space the players can explore, and we wanted to broaden this a little bit. So the first layer is pretty obviously just the room which you explore, the objects you find. We had another layer, which was because we also our commitment was also not only to extremism prevention, but also to educate children and young adults about the use of social media and online media. So we also had this layer that is actually happening inside of the computer. So you browse through different website mailings, through a Discord channel, or at least our version of a Discord channel. Surely enough, we couldn't use.
It's called Strife in our games.
It's called Strife because we couldn't use the original because of copyright infringements, of course. And this is the second layer, basically. You also find stuff on an old phone of Leon. And the third layer is you find those pictures, those photographs in Leon's room, and they always take you to a cutscene that shows what happens in the past. It's kind of the player character remembering what happened there. And there's a lot of story also being conveyed in those cutscenes. Another layer, and Flo also teased it earlier, was the lighting. We put a lot of effort in it to have the room appear very peacefully and very normal at first sight, but then you find all those kind of frightening details about him. For example, he started to become more and more aggressive. We also had some color coding in there because we knew that this guy is like more of an intellectual or more of a tech nerdy guy rather than a very emotional guy. That's why we chose the color blue as a very dominant color. On the other hand, everything that was added after this character who gets in contact with the new right, which we call Neue Rechte in Germany, everything he gets from them is also in the same color scheme, which is black and yellow, which is orientated on a real movement that uses this colors. More on that later too. And we also had some objects appearing in red that were either important or kind of connected to him becoming more and more aggressive. And our next step to actually transform educational value in this environmental storytelling was translating real things into fictional things you can find. And the new right uses a bunch of outputs to spread their message. One of them is the movement or a movement itself. It's called identitary movement, I guess, if you translate it. It's a thing that happens in a lot of European countries. And they distinguish themselves a lot from the old right wing by appearing more intellectual, by appearing more to the youth, actually. And we tried to recreate a movement like this too in our game. For our game, it's called Atavistic Action, Atavistische Aktion. But as you can see in the two images on the top left, the look and feel is kind of the same. Other channels they use is, for example, literature. And as I said, they can have this attitude of being or of seeming more like a very intellectual, but in the end, their message is the same as of the old right wing, which is like foreigners out of the country, don't mix with them. The women have a strict role in a family. A family has to look like this and that. They have basically the same message, just transported differently and package it in a new kind of appearance. They also use a lot of magazines that appeal to or should appeal to young people, to hipsters. We also recreated some of them. So they have this Arcadi magazine, for example, which we called Populi, and we also showed some of the topics they had in those magazines in our own version of that. They heavily use social media. Also have that. As I said, we have a kind of Discord channel in the game which you can explore, and everything, of course, is always commented by the main character. It was very important to us that he always commented, that you don't just find those, for example, racist memes, but you also get a comment on that. So it actually has a educational value. And the last thing, channel they use is music. And one peculiar thing there is that the right wing in Germany never actually approached rap or hip hop, because it's something so international and not at all very German. But they try to claim it again, and they use the same style, the same language as other rappers, but they use it to convey their message, which is very different from other rap. Since rap is so international and so much about subcultures, and their rap is more about the values I spoke of earlier. And they also have this kind of very soft appearance of some of the musicians. This movement is mostly composed of men, and only very few women, but the women that are in the movement are actually, they get slammed on posters and on magazines a lot, and are kind of those the poster people that should also appeal to young desperate men, because those are mostly who make up this new right movement. And we also tried to translate that in the game by having the main character have a crush on one of those poster girls, finding stuff from a right-winged rapper, finding texts from him. And as I said again, commenting on everything, commenting about like what is wrong about these texts, and that he never listened to stuff like that before. It's just a very, very quick overview of what we did. I don't want to get too much into detail. If you're interested, you can, of course, ask later about specific things. Our key learnings here were use synergies for commissioned projects, because we could actually test out a lot of ideas we had for also upcoming games, because it was funded. We also use synergies with the departments we were working with, because they could bring us so much knowledge about this new right, and they could also give us a lot of sources we could read into. It was a very nice collaboration where they actually also very clearly knew what their role was, and we clearly knew what our role was, and they gave us a lot of creative freedom. Stuff we learned was, whenever you're working with a partner, when you have a commission project, have clear conditions and requests for the project. And if there are negotiations for additional content, which we also had, for example, a little documentary after it, have consequent negotiations over it, because it can easily be that a contractor says like, can't we also do this and that? And because you all and we all love our games, of course we always want to have the best for our project, do the best for our project, have the best in mind, but it sometimes leads to an overload of work. So if there is additional content planned from the contractor, have consequent negotiations with it. And as with all our projects, we noticed there how important it is to have a dedicated testing phase at the end, and really stick to it so you can evaluate the game, because there was also some stuff we found out maybe a little bit too late. If you have questions about that, we can also talk about that later. And this was pretty much it.
Yeah, so just as a quick side note, I think because that was a very serious topic we made a game about, so after that we needed to do something completely different. As I told before, we like to explore different media, so I just wanted to show this little slide here. After that we made an app, a mobile app for preschoolers about dinosaurs, which is of course something completely different. It sports like hand-drawn dinosaurs, but I think we just wanted to show you this little thing before we get to the next part. We are already I think we are over our time, but we try to wrap it up soon. So should we go to this part now?
Yes.
Not that one again. Yeah, right. just the question now: how can anything of this be useful for your upcoming game jam and your project that you are planning to do? Probably, we think it might be a good idea, like to concentrate on core features of your idea, make a simple narration as simple as possible, like to have a concentrated approach. And just one recommendation that we wanted to give you, because that's a game we very much love, and they do a lot of things right. It's just a good example for a concentrated narrative in a very short game, is 30 Flights of Loving. Some of you maybe already know the game. It's already like 10 years old, and it's of course not state of the art, but they managed to tell a very emotional and great story in just 13 minutes. So the game is over after 30 minutes, but they managed to like put everything you need for a good story in this game. It's about a heist where the characters rob something. Don't want to spoil too much because the game is so short, but they do a lot of like ambient exposition, like environmental storytelling through newspapers, radio, through the airport where the game takes place. It's kind of an 80s Latin America. They also have a lot of indirect action, so you don't necessarily see the whole story, but they just skip important moments of the narration. So the player has to like pick up the pieces by themselves and piece it together somehow. So that I think it's an important message, just to know in a game when to leave things out. So you don't necessarily need to tell everything. So that was just a short a short recommendation. We also wanted to talk a bit about idea generation, like what is our approach to generate cool ideas for games.
Yes. So in the following part, we kind of try to give you a very boiled down version of what you can actually use. And this is on the one hand, idea generation. We will also talk very briefly about game design, and especially game design for very tiny games, as you do them in game jams. And also we want then also to just quickly talk a little bit about project management in those short game jams. You will find tons of sources in the internet for idea generation. We wanted to just present you some stuff that was working for us in the past. So one of them is the good old, I think probably most of you guys know it, good old technique of mind mapping. So you just make trees of ideas. You have core ideas, and then you have branches, and from those branches you have correlating ideas, and you just put that all down. You can use colors to highlight connections. I think I don't really have to explain too much what mind mapping is, because I think pretty much everyone used it at one point in their life. This is one of the mind map you saw is on the very, I think in the middle of the screen or in the very bottom. This is online program we use, which is called Miro. And for example, this is a big board we have for one of our projects. And the cool thing about Miro is that not only you can do those flowcharts, you can also start to even draw. You can make lists. We did some plans for the levels there actually to test them out. It's a very cool idea, and it's kind of expanding this idea of mind mapping and flowcharts to to even more, and to let you freely explore ideas also visually. Another idea is brainwriting, or brain chain as it sometimes is called, where you sometimes it's also called I think 6-3-5 rule, more on that later. The base idea of it is that you write down an idea in a certain amount of time, for example, 1 minute, and everyone who's brainstorming with you, you need multiple people for this, writes down one idea to a certain topic. For example, what should my game be about, or what style should it have, what gameplay, and everybody writes down those ideas on a sheet. And in the second round, you actually pass those around. Here I used an example of 3 people, so everyone passed it to the left, and then everyone writes additional ideas or comments to the idea the person just received. So for example, the one in the lower middle just received the red sheet from the top right and doesn't create new ideas on the sheet, just explores the idea that's already on the top. And it kind of frees up your mind because you have something you can already work on. You also contribute to the idea, so it becomes kind of everybody's idea. And you do this, in this case, for 3 people. You do it 3 times, and then you pick out the best ideas and discuss it. It's called the 6-3-5 rule because I think the optimal amount is supposed to be 6 people. I think 3 ideas every person writes down, and then 5 rounds in which it goes around. But for example, we in our team, I think we also did it just 4 or 5 of us. So it also is translatable to that pretty well. Another quite interesting thing that you can maybe also incorporate kind of passively into your thinking and in your ideation is reverse ideation. So don't just try to think, how can I make a great game? Because this is a pretty open question. You can also think like, how can I make a very horrible game? And try to find out what makes a game horrible, and then maybe just do the opposite, or just use it as a feature and have something interesting there. So for example, how can I make my first person controls horrible? By not having them react fast enough. And then you know kind of what is important for the players. You can also use this on a more narrative level. So you can ask, how can I make my protagonist as unsympathetic and awful of a person as possible? And you can either use that actually and have it be part of the protagonist and make it interesting, or just see, okay, this is the set of things that don't really work for my protagonist, so it can try to find opposites of that. And another thing is lateral thinking. So if I would, it's a term coined by Edward de Bono, and he's very famous for it. And it's also something that is very interesting for just playing around with ideas. Lateral thinking is all about having new ideas very fast and don't think about what ideas are right or wrong. So if I would ask you, try to find the way from A to B, most of you would actually rely on patterns we learned, because those patterns can be very useful sometimes. And you would try to find your way through the maze. Lateral thinking is literally just thinking of this solution, breaking the rules here. But by doing this, you can actually find out a lot of ways that are not very obvious, and it's kind of this thinking around the corner. If you believe Edward de Bono, this lateral thinking is actually a form of creativity you can learn by exercising it. And you can do it in your everyday. You can also do it in your game jam by, for example, just taking 2 objects you have in front of you and trying to have object A enhance object B. So I'm having, for example, I'm having a lamp and a window. And so, for example, I could think of maybe a window that at the same time is a big LED wall or something, and make an interesting product out of that. It's not important by spamming those ideas to have a really functional idea. It's just important to take other ways of thinking and generating a lot of ideas. And it sometimes takes you to very interesting places. And it also works for game ideas, of course. And another thing that is not only about idea generation, but also is doing mood boards. And I think some of you might have also tried this before. Mood boards are just collections of images that have the same mood as what you want to tell. Here is one mood board from an online portal called Notion, which we use. This portal Notion, just on a side note, is like Wikipedia, and it's very cool for game design documents because you can create pages and have those pages linked to each other, and it gives you just a very nice overview of your project, not just in a big text form, but actually in an interactive linked form. And here is a mood board for one of the for one part of the next game we're working on right now. And by just looking at other references, you sometimes get either new ideas or your idea of what your product should look like gets more concrete.
So just a few quick ideas for for game and narrative design, like working together. So one thing we learned from a talk that was given by Giant Sparrow, who made Edith Finch. What remains of Edith Finch is concentrating or focusing on core ideas. So I think often it is helpful to keep the scope small in a way. It's always tempting to think big, but mostly a smaller scope can probably be more entertaining or more rewarding. So if you try to identify or single out the most important core values of your game and try to pick every feature that you like to implement accordingly. Does this feature do something for one of our core ideas? Then keep it. If it doesn't, so throw it out. It's just a simple way to keep the scope manageable. Also, something we talked about earlier when we did the Leon's identity is prototyping everything as a gray box. It can also be done in an analog way with paper prototyping, but just try to see if the game is already fun without all the assets. If that's so, then it's probably a good idea. So if the game works without, it's a good way. Also, third and last idea, work with limitations. This is an example. The game is called Super Hot, and legend says that if I remember correctly, they didn't have a person for 3D animation and for 3D modeling, but they had an intern who could do that. So they gave the intern the task to do the animations, which led to a quite unique style, which you can see here, which is like a very stylized kind of a shooter. And it all came from, at least in some part, from limitations they had to work with.
Yes. So. And lastly, the topic project management, because it's a very important topic on long-term projects, but also on short-term projects. And especially since you only have such a limited amount of time, it's important to have a little bit of structure in there at least. I know from my experience with game jams that it's also some part of the fun to actually be super chaotic in the game jam, but there are just some things that you can use to help you see if you're on the right track. This, what you can see here, is a portal called Codex, and it's a project management tool from also a team that is here at Saftladen. I think it is free for students, so you could try it out, I think. And it has this card and decks metaphor for tasks you're doing. And if you start as a team, I think it's always important on the one hand, especially on game jams, to tinker around with fields you usually don't work on, because that's what game jams are for pretty much, right? But even if you take another role, try to have clear roles and responsibilities, because if you start to have meetings over everything, if you're starting to discuss everything too much, then you will actually not achieve anything in this short time. So you should actually have people whose job it is just to be the artist or establish a visual style. You should have someone who's maybe the main programmer or some subsets of programming, maybe player controls or something like that. It helps a lot to take faster routes. And another thing is try to actually break down your tasks beforehand into subtools. It's something you can do in Codex. So you have this in those sets here, in those decks, you have cards which are sub packages of work. So for example, if you want to build a level, you can think of all the assets, all the 3D assets that are in this level, maybe have a hierarchy in them, which of those assets are absolutely necessary, which of them are just nice to have, and which of them are just pure clutter that is laying around to make the scene more detailed. And just beforehand, try to write all that down on whichever tool you use. And it helps a lot to see, are we on track right now? What should we cut? And I think it's very important for long-term projects, but it could also help you in your game jam. We here are using kind of our own version of Scrum. Maybe some of you have heard of this Scrum method. It's a form of agile project management where you have little sprints in which you try to always complete one feature or one idea. So for example, and we're still working on this Dino project right now, and in our current sprint, our goal is to prototype 3 new little games. And all our efforts are actually working toward this, this goal. And next week, we then look at what we did in the last sprint and re-evaluate, did it actually work? What should our next step from here be? And we can also test out if what we planned actually worked, and either go in the direction we went before or take a completely new direction if we found out new stuff. And I think that's also in a very small scenario can also help you. So for example, in a 2-day game jam, a sprint can maybe be 5 or 6 hours, and you can all just concentrate on one idea or feature on those 6 hours. So everybody's actually working towards the same vision of the game. And the cool thing at the end of each sprint, you kind of know what you achieved, and you kind of have this finished entity in itself and can build upon that. Again, game jams are pretty open, and you might not want to use that, but it can help you in pretty much all of your projects. And I think with this, we're 20 minutes over time, but we're finally finished.
Yes.
Thank you for your attention, and we would be super happy to answer your questions if you have any.
Thank you very much. This was a lovely presentation. And yeah, as you mentioned, we are now going into a Q&A session. And before the questions pile up, I'll just ask a few of mine, I guess. You mentioned like gray boxing, right? Did you use that both in the Trüberbrook and also in Trüberbrook, or just in Leon's identity?
Yeah, that's actually a very interesting question, because Trüberbrook had such a special way of building the sets that we actually didn't use too much of gray boxing. I think sometimes we had some placeholder objects in there, but since everything was so so heavily relying on those real world sets, we didn't have a lot of gray boxing, which was also in some parts then the kind of the hard thing about this workflow, because normally you can move around stuff if it doesn't work. In Leon's Identität, you could see that the layout of the room changed a little bit after we made this gray boxing. After we finished those sets, just like on a real film set, what was caught on camera was kind of in camera, and then you couldn't really change it. And we had we could change some minor details if we found out one thing is not working, but it was way more complicated than usually. So I guess if we would do it again, we would probably, before we actually built the models, build a gray box version of the whole game and try to find out what works.
At least a paper prototype. We tried that on some of the models, but in the end you have to put it in the engine just to see if it works. So
yeah. And I think like everybody like in between the presentation like was really amazed like with this photogrammetry and like stop motion look of the Trüberbrook. Did you so why did you choose for like this kind of like workflow or like the art side? What was the kind of like the main idea behind it? Like why go with this kind of like style?
Do you mean with this kind of technical approach or with the visual?
Yeah, with the technical approach of like, you know, making sets and like doing the photogrammetry and then putting it into the engine and then lighting it into the engine and so on.
Yeah, I think you can tell more about the approach, why we did what we did, but in the beginning we made some like tests. We also tried to like take the models and do some virtual lighting on that, which would have been a bit more easier in a way, but it just didn't convey like it wasn't the same magic in the pictures that we could achieve with real lighting. I think that was one point.
Yes, exactly. And we there was a game in the 90s already that used miniature models and clay models, especially as a game world. It was called The Neighborhood, and they just used image backdrops, and it already especially for the 90s, it looked amazing. It looked a little bit like a stop motion movie, but then you have this problem of you have a backdrop and a character, and you can't really interact in 3D space. So we wanted to kind of cherry pick all the features, the real lighting from the photographs, and at the same time have 3D space, which makes the levels way more experienceable, you know, way more haptic also, because you can actually move into the scene and you have real world phenomenons like stuff moving prospectively and letting the characters cast shadow into the scene realistically. That's why we kind of cherry picked from different approaches.
Cool. And also one question from BB about stop motion. I mean, what it is. So she's saying that she did both stop motion and games, and it was really cool to see them combined. Is the method you choose very expensive and needs a huge team, or do you think it could be downsized?
Well, I think it in any case can be downsized, because it depends, of course, a lot on the materials you use. That is one thing. You can do it with a small team and with a small scale. In our case, we had the luck that we had like professional set builders who usually do like the backdrops for our TV stuff. That is one benefit of having every profession under one roof. So we could concentrate on our games, and they could build things for us. But one thing we should mention is that we tried to pick up stop motion, but in the end we didn't really do it because it was too laborious. I think we have some experience with doing stop motion stuff and like producing 5 seconds of animation in one day or something like that. And in the end, it just wouldn't work out for a complex game like this. But I think it could be possible, right?
Yes, there are also other teams that are doing it right now. There is one game which is called 1111. Actually, there are many games who use this animation, at least the aesthetic of 12 frames per second animation. And there's also several ways to kind of fake it inside of an engine. So have 3D characters move as if they were just animated 12 frames per second. All that is possible. And as I think, as Flo already explained pretty well, it can all be downsized. One example is once for a workshop I gave for a little bit longer workshop, I actually recreated all of the workflow just by myself. And even though I took some of the old models, I also built some of the models myself. And of course, it didn't look as fantastic as the models our colleagues did. But the base, I just wanted to prove that the base can be done by a single person. And if you get more used to it, more experience, probably also get a better model builder by that time. And I think it is very possible. As I already mentioned, our way of doing it is very, very specific, has its own pitfalls. But if you research the other projects that are out there right now, maybe you can also just cherry pick what you like from certain projects.
Okay, cool. Thank you. That was an amazing explanation. One more question. I think that's more for the Leon's entity. Wojciech asks, how does a game all about environment storytelling work without the assets in gray box?
Clever question, actually. Clever question.
With your imagination. Yeah, it's basically, I think it comes down to that, because when you do the gray boxing, I think you pretty much know what everything should mean, what you put down there. But of course, it's difficult to let it play test in a gray box form for someone who doesn't know what it's about. So yeah, that's a pretty good question.
Yes, I think gray boxing is also just a term, and you shouldn't necessarily take it too literal. For an example, like Leon's Identität, we actually didn't do it, but it's a way you could approach it. For example, have all those gray box models, and if you want to look at a specific magazine or a specific book, just take real world examples or stuff other people did. It's all right if it's just in your prototype, and just slam them on the 3D models just to convey the information, you know, of what a magazine, for example, looks like. It all doesn't have to fit with each other. The lighting can be all over the place. And I think for our current project, we sometimes did that. We just bashed textures on top of each other just to create, for example, paintings that should be hanging on the walls, just to convey the message. Everything else that it fits into the game world, it can come afterwards. But when you're exploring, do the players actually, for example, recognize what I want to tell them when they find this book? You can just quickly prototype it by either just photoshopping something yourself or taking something from the internet. And I think that's kind of the trick in environmental storytelling. If you have a lot of media you find, books you find, it's not only gray boxes, it's kind of gray boxing plus, it's gray boxes plus a little bit of random texture.
Cool. Thank you for this answer. Next question is from Maya Pivets, and she asks, would you do a Kickstarter again?
That is a good question, because there are some implications to doing another Kickstarter, I think, because the whole platform changes. It changes through the years. I think when we did that was like 5 years ago. There were already like projects using the Kickstarter more as a marketing tool. I think the goal wasn't necessarily to collect all the money, but just to get the exposure of your project on Kickstarter, because there is a big community. There are millions of people who can see your project if you just make it right. If we would do a Kickstarter again, we would definitely have some ideas how to make it easier for us. Because all the, like I initially said, the management of the community, it's its own job. Because you have all the rewards, you have to create for the campaign, you have to send it out to each backer individually. Then people move, they change their address, they have all sorts of issues. Even now, the campaign was 5 years ago, but still today people write us that they didn't get their key at some point, which I can confirm is not correct, because I know I sent the key, but it somehow went to their spam and now is like 4 years away or something like that. So yeah, there's a lot of planning that we didn't know before, and we would approach it a bit different. But if we had the vision, I think we could do it again.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I think from all the colleagues we have here in this shared co-working space, all of them who did Kickstarter are answering it pretty much like we do. They're all saying it's a bit difficult with the money because you also have pay a lot of fees, and as Flo mentioned, prepare the rewards and everything. So money-wise, it's quite complicated. It is interesting for community building. And if you have any questions regarding this, if you maybe like planning to do a Kickstarter campaign of your own, you can also always just write us. We had our emails on the last slide of the presentation, so you can just screenshot that. Also, as Flo said, I want to emphasize that it is quite a few years ago now. We might not be up to date too much, but I think there are some things you learn doing a crowdfunding campaign that are convertible to all crowdfunding campaigns and are still actual, I think.
Cool, thank you. I mean, I guess the gist of it is that you would, I guess, hire somebody like to help you with, or like having like a special dedicated person just for doing that like job, like managing community and so on. And I think that also like a lot of similar stories from other creators. That mm-hmm. it's quite heavy. I mean, if you do it yourself, it's quite heavy, just like answering all of the emails, all of the requests, and so
yes.
on. And moving on to next question. I think that's a question from Goethe Institute, or more I guess from Urban. And how and why did you start to work with Böhme? Did they just butcher the name?
Böhmermann, yeah.
Jan Böhmermann. He's a German, like, I don't know what's the word for satirica. He's a journalist, an entertainer, and he has its own late night show, which is quite famous in Germany. And we started working on that project together. So it goes way back, like in the years when we started doing TV stuff, when we all came from art school. That was also the time when we did the first project together, which was then called Roche and Böhmermann, which was, well, it's a long story. It was a talk show, but yeah, people knew each other, so we started cooperating.
Okay, cool. Maybe one question, like you from my side, like you said that Codex and Notion are really like good tools for like project management and taking down notes. Can you like share like more like insights, like how do you use these tools, like maybe more in depth, or like or do you even like combine both of them, or you just choose one of them and just stick to one?
Yes, also a good question, because we're not the perfect example how to do it, actually, I think. Sometimes we're using one more than the other. I think Codex is really more a way of project management. So you have your tasks in there and you're moving them in between decks. Lately, we tried to have a product or feature backlog where we have all the tasks in there as far as we can plan them. Then we move them to another deck, which is the actual sprint, which we're working on right now.
Okay.
You can set effort for each task you're working on. So you can kind of approximate this task will take me 4 hours. And by this, you can see if you already have enough for a 40 hours week, for example. Or if you even have too much. And at the end, we all move it to a last deck, which is like the completed deck. But there are also other approaches. You could also just have an art deck where all the art-related tasks are in the game design deck. And this is all about project management. The Notion itself is more thought to be like a wiki, and this way you can use it for game design documents. So writing down dialogues, writing down game design ideas, everything that is actually more into the production itself. For our actual project right now, for Dino Dino, it happened to also be our project management tool, because we have a long list of tasks in a table, and we're just crossing it off there, and we're doing basically the same we could do in Codex. Actually, I have no idea where we're doing it right now.
Codex would be much more suited for that,
yes.
Because every task is its own little card. You can like assign it to someone who has to do that task. You can put the effort on it, like this will take me 1 day or 2 hours. You can block that card if someone, if you need help from someone, or you need someone to complete another task first. So it's it would be better suited for that. I don't know why we don't use it for our. It just happened.
Yeah, I think it was because we were writing down all new features ideas we had for the 2 months we're working on Dino Dino again. And from this list, we expanded it with columns. Is it in our sprint? Which level is it? And it was just convenient. But the better way would actually to take this list and convert it to an actual program that's built for project management like Codex.
Yeah. Thanks for the answer. Maybe more general question from my side. Like at the beginning, you showed the map of Germany and all of the like studios and so on. How is the like you said that also the community was more vibrant like before the pandemic. Like how is like the how is the state now, and like are there like more virtual events, or like more like hybrid ones, or like are there any like how to say like replacements for like physical events or like conferences and so on?
Yeah, the physical events basically ceased to exist right now. There were some approaches to do this virtually, but I would say it didn't work out that well. I think many of us have experienced this also in a working environment, because if you go into your home office, you just like doing all these Zoom calls and stuff like that, you get tired of it. I think people, it worked in the beginning of the pandemic, but later it didn't work so good anymore. I think there were 1 or 2 physical events in recent months when numbers went down, and it was very refreshing to go there, but it was like very with very strict rules, and of course not comparable to the events that were before. But before that, it was a very vibrant scene with lots of events. Like every week you could go somewhere to play each other's games, or to just share your burdens, basically.
Yeah, totally get it. Yeah, like also like we had like few like in-person meetups, and it was totally different than just meeting on Discord or like on Zoom. And it's hard to replace the physical connection.
And also, I think even the big events like Gamescom and all the 2 main awards we have here in Germany, they always used to be kind of a come together of the whole German game scene. Because I would say that the German game scene is kind of separated in a few big areas. So we have this Berlin area, we have this kind of in the west of Germany, and we have Munich. Those are the hubs kind of. And on those big awards and on Gamescom, you kind of always see all of them. And it's like a big, I don't know, class meeting with people from your old class. And for me, at least, it isn't the same. It doesn't have the same appeal. Gamescom this year was just, for me, I watched a few of the live streams, but I didn't really connect. That's really a pity, because I also used to meet my old professor on events like this, and now I haven't heard of her like in years.
Yeah, it's quite quite hard. Also, we also had in Slovenia, we had like the Slovenian conference, and it's kind of like one time in a year when everybody meets, and it's like quite like the gathering. And this year it was also like cancelled. So I think I'm like out of questions, and I will just do a last shout out or last call for questions. And if there are no questions anymore, we're gonna slowly finish this, and at least we're gonna move like for let's say for some time. We're gonna move to the Discord to have kind of like some kind of like a post talk chat or like a mingling to like simulate like how it would look like in real life with the beer and after the talk meeting. And I will take this time before, if there are any more questions, to thank you again for the lovely presentation and to like show all of the like great games and like shared with us all the knowledge. And I hope that we see you also in the future.
Yes. Yeah, thank you so much for having us.
Yeah, thank you a lot. And we're also really hoping to have something together in the future again.
We would love to come to Ljubljana.
Yes.
I've been there before. I know how lovely the place is, so we need to return.
That would be amazing. Yeah. It's just a shame. I mean, that you couldn't come, but I guess next year I hope.
Yes, that would be awesome.
And I think that's that. We're gonna finish the stream. Thank you again, guys. And we are now